Hello and thank you for watching. This is Ariel Adamson of Rogue Tech. Today we're going to be covering a very aggressive deck called 27 Angry 1-Drops. So this deck was originally created to be something to test against, and then at the beginning of FNM, on a whim, I decided to go ahead and play it, and ended up taking first that night, and then 4-1 the following week. So the deck is pretty simple in concept, running 27 1-Drops. For Soldier of Pantheon. Soldier of Pantheon is arguably one of the most powerful 1-Drops in Standard right now. Protection from multicolored coming in very relevant in a lot of matches. Dryad Militant, nowhere near as relevant as it used to be, minus the fact that it's a 2-1. The fact that it does come down with 2 power on turn 1 is very helpful. Judge's Familiar. Judge's Familiar does a few things. The main thing it does is it stops a lot of the removal, or it sets my opponent a turn behind. And when I'm dropping 2, even 6 power on turn 2, Judge's Familiar, putting my opponent a turn behind with their removal is very, very helpful. It makes Anger of the Gods cost the same as Supreme Verdict, which by then I've already dealt lethal or close to lethal. This is a white weenie deck, so 4 Brave the Elements is an absolute must. Just final kill spell, as well as protection in a pinch. A lot of white weenie decks have been using Ethereal Armor lately. I've found this to be extremely powerful. The first strike is probably the most relevant, but the toughness is also extremely relevant because it stops a lot of the weaker removal from actually removing my creatures, especially if my first turn drop was a Hopeful Eidolon. This is an enchantment creature, so a turn 2 Ethereal Armor on it allows it to swing as a 3/3 lifelink, and the little bit of added life definitely helps me in just being aggressive because I don't have to worry about taking a few hits here and there, especially from the bigger stuff. Now my personal addition is Silence. I only run 3 in the main. Silence has been extremely powerful. Against the control decks, it forces them to not play Wrath on turn 4 or whatever removal they may have. It also sets a lot of the aggressive decks back a turn. A turn 3 Silence on Monstrous totally puts them off their game, and they're just out of things to do, especially if they've got a Voyaging Satyr in play, because that is not a mana ability and you can respond to it, so you can wait till they tap out to actually silence them. For Precinct Captains, now we're getting into the 2-drops. Honestly, Precinct Captain is more or less my least favorite card in the deck. He's extremely powerful, don't get me wrong. 2/2 first strike, trades favorably with just about everything in Standard in the early game. Also getting those little 1/1 soldiers is helpful for blockers in a pinch, but even more helpful just as more aggression. What I don't like about him is I've almost always got something better to do with that 2 mana. As you'll see, the curve is extremely low in this deck, so spending 2 mana on anything needs to be very powerful, such as Imposing Sovereign. Removing my opponent's blockers in combination with the silence and the fact that I've got, on average, 5 to 6 power by turn 2, allowing my opponent's creatures to come in tapped removes any chance of them blocking, especially when I follow it up with Leonin Snarecaster. These can also be Azorius Arresters. I stuck with a Snarecaster just because tapping my opponent's creature gives them the opportunity to attack on the following turn, which is almost always the wrong decision, but at my local meta, a lot of times I'd tap their creature and then they'd go and attack and basically free tap their creature, so I'm able to get in even more damage. Azorius Arrester would definitely be better at any high competition event, just because the Detain can shut down things like Voyaging Satyr and things that are going to actually become quite an issue. Now, keeping with the slight synergy going on with enchantments, I have 4 Pacifisms. This is now copies 7 through 12 of tapping my opponent's creatures or making sure that they can't block at least, so I'm getting in that final amount of damage. So basically my first 2 turns are getting power on board, my third turn is getting even more power on board and making sure that they're not blocking, and then every turn after that, if there's turns after that, is just dealing the last few points of damage. There are 17 lands in this deck, 17 planes. Nothing super exciting there. Just pretty straightforward white weenie deck. The only odd part is that it is a very, very low curve running silence where there'd usually be a few more lands. The sideboard is where it gets a bit more interesting. So the first thing you're going to notice is that I've got 3 lands on the board, 1 plains and 2 Nykthos. What these lands allow me to do is edit my curve as well as change what lands I'm seeing more often depending on what I have in and what I anticipate the match to play out as. The first thing that you need to realize is that this deck almost always wins game 1. There's just not a whole lot of main board interactions with it. It's just able to win out in game 1. So game 2, I'm almost always on the draw. And what this means is that I need to be a lot more reactive, and I also need to be hitting my curve because most of the reactive plays don't come down until 3 drops. So all of a sudden I need to make sure that I'm hitting 3 lands instead of 2, which is generally what the deck functions at. So I can bring these in, generally only bring in 1, maybe 2 lands. I don't think I've ever brought in all 3, but having the options to switch it up, add 1 plains, 1 Nykthos, or 2 Nykthos, or even just a plains, or even just a Nykthos, depending on how I anticipate the match to go. So with the reactivity, I do have Renounce the Guilds. This is honestly the weakest card on the board. I kind of treat these as 2 blank spots, basically replace them with anything else that's already in the board. They were mint originally for Blood Barons, Inagos, the bigger multicolor things, Boros Reckoner, the things that can be a little bit problematic, even Tension Sphere. But I run a fair amount of multicolor myself, so these really are pretty weak. I do run 2 Heliod on the board. These generally come in against removal heavy matches because depending on their draws and my draws, they might actually be able to keep me off the game long enough that he becomes relevant. Also just having a 5/6 indestructible constantly threatening them, not necessarily hitting very often, but at least threatening them is very powerful. He synergizes amazingly with Nykthos because if I do run into a full board Wrath effect, I am able to Nykthos for a lot of devotion and float the mana through the Wrath effect and then pop out 2 or 3 enchantment creatures before the phase ends. And they are enchantment creatures, so it keeps with that theme of keeping Ethereal Amor very, very powerful. Banisher Priest is the main card I was talking about when I meant reactivity. Instead of tapping him down with Snarecaster, he's usually the first card to come out. Instead of tapping down with Snarecaster, I'm bringing in Banisher Priest to really answer what they're doing. And I've noticed this is very, very powerful in the mirror match. After I won last week, I noticed that this week around, I think there were 7 white weenie decks, but some of them were splashing red, some of them were splashing blue because they're going heroic or madcap skills or investing just generally more into a single creature. So Banisher Priest rapidly becomes a 3-for-1, and even if Banisher Priest ends up dying for some reason, still killing their creature and their enchantment and whatever else they've invested is very, very powerful. Then I've got 2 Boros Reckoner, very good with the devotion. Generally, these always come in if I'm bringing in Nykthos. He's very, very good in the monstrous matchups because all of a sudden I've got basically an unblockable dude because they're going to take more damage by blocking him than just letting him in, or a complete stagnation of the board where they just can't attack and I'm just stalling for the Brave the Elements. 1 Spear of Heliod. This is very, very good in the mirror match. I don't bother bringing it in against any decks that have an average power and toughness greater than mine. This is just to kind of offset the mirror match or any other decks that are running weaker things such as Young Pyromancer. The destroy creature is almost never relevant, but what is relevant is it's another enchantment and it's 2 devotion that are able to stay in play. I've got the 4th Silence. Generally bring these in against sorcery speed decks such as Monstrous, or decks that rely on sorcery speed Wrath such as Anger of the Gods and Supreme Verdict and whatever else they might be doing on sorcery speed. I've also really messed up some Golgari decks with this because a lot of their actual board presence is at sorcery speed and the removal doesn't always protect them long enough. Last, I've got a Gideon. Most white weenie decks I've seen are running Ajani, and I do agree that Ajani deals a lot more damage a lot faster, but I'm bringing in Gideon for a different reason. Gideon is good in the mirror match, of course, just because he does get big and he's an indestructible beater, which does become fairly relevant. But he's actually even more relevant in the control match, where I can be a little bit more worried, because if I go against something that's super heavy removal, they're going to be forced to use their Hero's Downfall or Dreadbores or whatever Planeswalker kills they have on my creatures just because I'm so aggressive. And then when something like Gideon comes out, they're just kind of SOL as far as dealing with him. So that is the board. Sideboarding is definitely the most important part about this deck. It's easy to win game 1, I will admit that, but game 2 is a lot more difficult. You have to make sure that you are taking out the cards that are less relevant, such as I generally lower my count on Dryad Militant or Judge's Familiar, depending on what kind of removal I plan on seeing. I will also lower the count on Silence against Mono Black, because instant speed removal or decks that can play their cards either on your turn or their turn, Silence doesn't do anything to them. Precinct Captain, he will come out when I'm on the play a lot of the times, or at least come down on the play, just because I need to be doing more interactive things. He's not going to attack until turn 3, and by then they've already gotten something. And that's if I chose to play him on turn 2. Generally, he's not worth playing until turn 3, and that means he's not even attacking until turn 4, and that's just way too slow for this deck. Snarecaster is almost an automatic out. It would still be an automatic out if it was an Azorius Arrestor, just because he's easy to remove and he doesn't do much on the draw. On the play, he is amazing because he stops their blockers. Pacifisms, obviously, if they have creatures, they're in. If they don't have creatures, they're out. So, thank you for watching. This has been Ariel Adamson with Rogue Tech and the 27 Angry 1-drops. I believe I am retiring this deck, at least for my personal use, and should have something new to share with you guys in a couple of weeks. Have a great day.